Mark Pinto for inviting me here to meet some of the folks here from the Phoenixville area. I am a volunteer with AARP's Consumers Issues Task Force, and I've been a volunteer since 2009. Prior to that, I served as a United States Postal Inspector. Initially, I started in the Newark division, and then after 7 years in Newark, I came down to Philadelphia and worked out of the Philadelphia office and retired in 2005 from the Postal Inspection Service. While I was a postal inspector, a number of years I spent working mail fraud cases. Basically, if you have a plan to cheat someone or defraud someone and the mails are used in some way to carry out that scheme, our agency could get involved, and that's how we got involved in a variety of different kinds of investigations. Today, I want to start with telling you that we work very, very closely with a number of different organizations and agencies. We work with the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. They also are involved in educating consumers. We work with FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority. We work with the SEC, and they also have an education program for investors, and they have all kinds of information that's available, and I'll mention some of it that I have. I have some brochures and booklets here, most of which were provided to me for your benefit from the Pennsylvania Department of Banking, which means that if somebody that you know could use any of these things, they can get these publications free of charge by contacting the Pennsylvania Department of Banking. And we can talk a little bit about that later on. Investing, if people are investing, first of all, you have to know investment means taking risks. There's no such thing as a risk-free investment. If somebody mentions a risk-free investment, that is probably a red flag. Proceed with caution and maybe do not go through with the deal. They can be sweet talkers, the swindlers, the fraudsters. Now, they are not, they're not a large group of people, but they're a small group. They can do a lot of damage. And that's what this is all about in terms of trying to keep you informed, because one of the best weapons against being cheated is being informed, being a smart investor, knowing that you need to ask questions. A lot of times you start asking questions, and if they can't answer them to your satisfaction, you know, you've done a good job, and you perhaps realize maybe that's not who I'd like to invest with. I would now like to have you look at this, and it says the typical fraud victim, and you have 5 choices, and this is not a classroom, so I'm not going to scold you. I just want you to take a look at this. Victims of investment fraud have which of these characteristics? A, or 1, female, no college education, below average financial literacy, they live alone, or none of the above. What do you think is the correct answer there?
Well, it's
all of the above, probably. I'm saying all of the above. Because it happens to all of them. Sometimes you're females, sometimes there's no college education, but some don't need the education. They get schooled by other people where they're okay. And then you have low average financial literacy. But some of them get an education, but it's a false education.
This is the demographic. They have done studies, and they've interviewed people, and they wanted to find out who is the most common victim. Why don't you take a look at that and see what it says? It says male, 55 to 65 years old, more financially literate, college educated, recent change in financial or health status. And I think that's a big key right there.
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
sometimes people have, you know, whether there's a physical problem, they get laid off, there's certain things that they were planning and now they can't get there, and they can then see if there's any way that they can make up so that they can get to where they want to get to financially. But you see, risk takers and higher income. And that is the person who gets victimized the most. I got that answer wrong. When I looked at the first thing, I made the mistake of saying, oh, women. Because my feeling was women have their husbands do the financial stuff. A lot of times the husband doesn't work with the wife. Wife doesn't know what's going on. If the husband dies, she has no clue about anything. So that's why, but I got it wrong. So even myself as a fraud investigator and all, I got this question wrong. So don't feel bad if you looked at it and thought, you know, whatever you thought. But these are the basically the characteristics of the most likely fraud victim. Now, let me go back to something over here, because we're not going to be looking at too many of these, but here. How big is the problem? And there you see Bernard Madoff at the top of the list, the $50 billion Ponzi scheme, right? Stanford Investments, this is an $8 billion Ponzi scheme. Tom Petter's, allegedly $3.5 billion Ponzi scheme. Something called the Greater Ministries, $500 million in losses by 18,000 victims. And then it says underneath there were other cases with losses between 10 and 50 million. Now, what I wanted to mention about these specific cases, as you remember, Bernie Madoff was a financier, he was a broker, he was an investment advisor, he was in the business, he was well known. And because he was well known and had such a great reputation, people said, well, how can you go wrong with this guy? Because he had that air about him and a track record, so to speak, that people believed in. But it was all a mirage. Because he said even in down times, he could make money for you.
Yes, you can. Everything's worth money except for carbon and diamonds.
I'm going to just mention a couple of these other cases briefly.
False information given to the public.
How are you?
If you don't know, let me just mention, they call this a Ponzi scheme. The originator of the Ponzi scheme is a gentleman by the name of Charles Ponzi, who did it in 1920. He was the first guy. And what he was doing, he promised 50% returns in only 90 days. He used postal reply coupons, which were purchased overseas, and then he would have them sent here to the United States, and he would turn them in for stamps. He would sell the stamps. He was doing okay, but then he decided to let people know, and people started to get money back. And they're thinking they're making money on their investment. They weren't making money on their investments. Later investors their money was going to the initial investors, so they were getting some money initially, those people that were first on board. So they started talking, and all of a sudden this became a pretty big scheme. This guy was making money hand in glove, Charles Ponzi. He basically bought these discounted postal coupons in other countries and redeem them at face value in the United States. That's all legal. But then when he got the people involved and started saying, you can make this kind of money, it was not true. It was not true. And that's how the Ponzi scheme originated. Charles Ponzi. He died in Rio de Janeiro in 1949, penniless. Bernie Madoff, he operated the largest Ponzi scheme in the entire U.S. history, over $50 billion. And one of the things that you maybe hear people talk about when they talk about investments, never put all your eggs in one basket. And there were people that had all of their money tied up with Bernie Madoff. There was one gentleman that they said he lost all of his life savings and everything. He became a greeter in Walmart. He had been a millionaire.
I heard Walmart's gonna close down too.
Stanford Investments. This was done by Robert Allen Stanford out of Houston, Texas. He had a business for many, many years, and it seemed like it was legitimate. And he was actually, in 2008, the Forbes 400 list, he was listed as one of the 400 richest Americans with an estimated wealth of $2.2 billion. He was basically cheating people left and right and using the money for, he said he was for himself. He was telling investors he could double their money with certificates of deposit. And he is now serving time in jail. He was sentenced to 110 years in prison. Thomas Joseph Petters. He owned a company called Petters Group Worldwide. He convinced investors to provide funds to buy merchandise for resale at a profit through retail outlets like Costco and Sam's Club. And people thought, hey, that sounds like a great idea. What did he use the money for instead? By giving lulling payments, giving some money to some of the investors so they could say, hey, yeah, we're doing well, we're doing real great, and getting other people involved. By paying off others who assisted him in this fraud, by funding businesses that he owned and controlled, and by financing his extravagant lifestyle. He was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison in 2010 in Minnesota, and that is the longest prison sentence ever recorded in the state of Minnesota for a financial fraud. 2010. Greater Ministries. This was headed by a guy by the name of Gerald Payne from Tampa, Florida. And his wife was involved too, Betty. They bribed, they were part of the evangelical Christian ministry. They bribed church leaders around the United States. They promised church members that they would be able to double their money in no time. Never happened. $500 million was obtained from 18,000 victims who believed in this. He and his wife, along with several other co-conspirators, received fairly substantial prison sentences. The husband got 27 years in prison. He was 61 years old, I believe, at the time. His wife was a little bit younger. She got 12 and a half years to serve. And it's very possible both will serve their life separately in jail. So those are just some of the things that you should be aware of. What's important is if you don't know anything about a particular investment, you have to learn as much as you can. You can learn by maybe reading things that are available out there, not from the organization that's going to sponsor the luncheon or the dinner, because they're going to make it sound like this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You want to make sure you have independent information so that you can make an informed decision whether you want to invest any money in an investment or not. Because what you need to know, for the most part, because of like these extravagant lifestyles and things of that nature, a lot of times, by the time things are reported to the authorities, postal inspectors, FBI, or whoever, it may be years before the prosecution takes place. And as far as federal crimes, there's a 5-year statute of limitations. So you can only go back 5 years. If the guy's been in business for 20 years and has been cheating people for 20 years, you can't go back that far to claim that. You might be able to use some of that information, but you can't use that as part of the criminal complaint. So that's why it's important to be aware, if you provide money for an investment, make sure you know exactly what you're doing, because once you part with the money, you may never see that again. You need to know your product, you need to know your broker. For example, in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, you can check out a broker as well as the product that the broker is selling. The broker must be licensed to sell the product in Pennsylvania, and the product must be licensed to be offered for sale in Pennsylvania. So there are steps as individual investors or consumers that you can take to learn about some of the people that are offering things. Now, how do they, when they make these offers? There are a variety of ways that they make these offers. They might do it in person. You might see commercials on television, at least to start. They may invite you for a luncheon or dinner. What you need to know is a lot of times the high pressure doesn't come into play until they either invite you to their own office so that you're there by yourself, or you and your spouse or whoever, and that's where maybe they're going to apply some pressure. Or in your home. They want to meet you at your home so that it's a one-on-one situation, or you and your spouse, and then they try to apply pressure and say, oh, this is a great deal, so this and that. Again, you have to be aware, and there are all kinds of things that are being offered out there, and you need to know exactly what they are. Today, a lot of times they use the telephone and they use email. And do you know why they use maybe only those two without you seeing them physically?
Mail fraud.
No, they're hiding from you. If you receive an email from, the XYZ company, you have no idea, are they legitimate? Where are they? And same thing for the individual, the person that calls you on the phone. And what they do is they try to build up a relationship. They may not try to get your money on the first phone call. But as you're aware, today, there's a lot of information that's available out there because of the computer. They may have your name, your address, how much you earn, how much your house is worth. They can get all that information because of data banks that are out there today. What used to take a long time before, now may only take minutes to get in terms of information. So like when somebody gets a call and they say, hello, Fred, you go, oh, how do they know my name? Well, again, maybe you don't have a computer and you don't use the computer. But if you have children or grandchildren, maybe they put a lot of information in the computer And don't forget, there are people out there that make up all kinds of lists. All kinds of lists. And we don't know, and there's nothing wrong with making a list. But we don't know which are the legitimate users of the list and which one are the con artists. Because you can buy and sell, exchange lists without a problem. So that's what's important. These people are skilled liars. If you tell them no over the phone, they might have a response, oh, you know, and they have what they call a refusal script, because they already have something written out. Well, if the person says A, you tell them B. If they say B, you tell them C, and so on and so on. So you have to be aware of that kind of thing. We were talking about some of these frauds in terms of investments. Now these were, you know, primarily Ponzi's, but don't forget, there are precious metal frauds. You know, buy gold, silver, you know, bullion, stock swindles, phony international investments, bogus franchises. When I was working as a postal inspector, there were, of course, a number of times where the economy was not doing so well. Or maybe you had you lost a job. And there were people out there that were selling legitimate franchises. And you know the legitimate franchises, right? McDonald's and things like that. You're familiar with them. But there were people that were selling vending machines, saying you could be asleep at night and your machine is making money for you. And what they would do is they would show a picture at what they thought was, people thought was their corporate headquarters. They did not work. They were actually based in a small office in a large building in New Jersey, but they sold to a bunch of Pennsylvanians, and that's how we got involved. They would show you the picture of a whole building with all the cars parked in the parking lot, and you would think, wow, that vending machine company must be huge, because they were selling to people in western Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania and Altoona and Johnstown and places like that, and saying, oh yeah, you can make a whole lot of money. And they would show you a picture of the vending machine. So you never actually saw the vending machine. And people provided their checks to buy these vending machines because they said, oh, don't worry. You can buy the vending machines from us, you'll buy the candy from us, and also we will set up shops. We'll know where to put these machines, so these machines will be making money for you. And what they did is they hired somebody to do the looking for the place to put the machine. And the bottom line is they lied to the people that you can make a lot of money. Yes, if you are in a legitimate vending machine business, you can make money. But if you had a machine that was poorly constructed and you were charging people $1,000 per machine, and you had to buy maybe a minimum of 5 machines, that's $5,000 out of your pocket. And we learned about this because people said all the promises they made never materialized. And we arrested the people selling these vending machines. And it was a franchise fraud. Common red flags as far as investments. High or guaranteed profits. That's a red flag. The investment is risk-free. There's no such thing as risk-free. And of course, there's that pressure. You have to invest now. The offer will not be here very long. It's a limited time offer, and it will never be repeated. And what they're trying to do is make you not think with your brain, but thinking emotionally. If I don't get in now, I will never get in, and I'm going to lose that opportunity to make up the money that I thought I would have it now, and I don't have it. So, again, you have to be aware that there are those kinds of things that are going on out there. most of you now have probably, saved. You're not necessarily investing more money, but what you want to do is preserve, make sure you keep the money that you have earned over your lifetime. Today, what's so bad about things with our youngsters is, when we were growing up, people had a pension. Today, you have 401ks, 403bs, where you have to invest the money yourself. It behooves you more than ever to become not only a literate in financial business, but to know as much as possible about these things, because you have to make your own investment. Before, you worked for the company for 25, 30, 35 years, and you knew you would leave and maybe they give you a nice cake and a watch or whatever, and you had a pension. And you knew you were going to be getting that money all along. Today, for the most part, the pensions are for the CEOs and the higher-ups. For all the workers, you have to do it on your own, So that's one of the things you have to be aware of. So my thing is this: if you're going to invest any money, or your children or grandchildren, make sure they get everything in writing before they decide they're going to part with their money, so that they can review this, maybe have an attorney or somebody else review this, so that they can get some good advice before they make a possible mistake, which would be very, very costly. One of the things I was just going to bring out, we're at the library here. Besides all these other books and stuff like that, if people want to read, whether it's yourselves or, well, I guess at this stage, you don't need this information as much as the children or grandchildren. But there are resources or sources at the library. You can get a book by John Bogle from Vanguard, and he wrote a book called The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. You can get a book like that just to read, to see if you're interested in what he has to say. Warren Buffett, what's his philosophy? Unless he understands it fully, he doesn't invest his money in it. Unless he understands something fully, he will not invest his money in it. Okay? But he has books out there too that you could read, how he went about doing his investing. Susie Orman was a waitress for a long, long time. I think she was 29 or maybe even 39 before she started becoming an investment guru. But she has books out there. One of her books is called The Road to Wealth. Now, there are more than one book by some of these authors. Daniel Solon, he wrote a book called The Smartest Investment Book You'll Ever Read, and it's about investing in mutual funds, in low-cost mutual funds. Again, somebody you can learn about or read about. Dave Ramsey, he's also an investment guy, and he has written a number of books. But those are just a few names that just came to my head today. There are probably many more authors and books on investing. There are books also on preventing identity theft, fraud, investment fraud, things of that nature. They're out there. All you need to do is look them up. Now, the reason I brought this in, this is the Sunday, June 24th edition of the Bucks County Courier-Times. And the guy is writing to Dave Ramsey, and he says, Dave, I make about $240,000 annually, but I have a $60,000 student loan, and he wants some advice with regards to that loan. He also mentions that he has gold and silver investments that might be worth a few $1,000s. The response by Dave Ramsey to this guy, and what he wants them to do is get rid of that student loan. But what's interesting, he says, I'd stop investing in gold and silver completely. I don't put money in precious metals at all. My advice is to cash out every bit of your gold and silver and put the money towards paying off your student loan. And I only bring that up because a lot of times there are commercials about gold and silver and all this, and you can make a whole lot of money, and what, maybe you don't want to keep it at home, you could keep it at our place. You could be sending money to a place you don't know anything about. You may not have any kind of investment. They're just taking your money and they're saying, oh yeah, we have your gold bullions right here. Try to get those gold bullions down the road, or gold coins. Invest in gold coins. Again, if you know nothing about coins, you better learn. Just as an aside, my wedding band. A guy who was part of our group has since retired. He was 80 when he retired, the second time. He took this to one of those, you know, they're one-page ads in newspapers.
We buy gold.
We buy gold. We buy your old gold. Please bring it in. He went to one of these places. Now, he was already well-informed and stuff. He took his ring off and he showed it to somebody. And he knew his gold ring was worth approximately $325. The guy says, I'll offer $7. And of course he says, no. Then the guy says, how about if I give you 95? Now, how many people, without thinking how much gold, how much this ring is worth, would say, let's see, $7. Yeah, it's a great deal. You have just been cheated out of a lot of money because you decided to sell that precious metal for $95. Now, that's just a little thing that I bring up. It has not that much to do with investments, but I'm just saying there are people out there that are willing to take your money. One thing that I learned as a postal inspector and as talking to consumers, there's no discrimination when it comes to your hard-earned money. They don't care whether you're black, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Irish, Italian, they don't care. As long as you have the green stuff, they are willing to separate you from the green stuff. Your jobs, as long as you live, and as long as you have your faculty, is to protect that. So you have to stay informed, be aware of what's going on. Sometimes I watch CBS This Morning. That comes on at 7 o'clock in the morning. And from time to time, they talk about various scams. And I learned about certain scams on those programs. KYW Radio, from time to time, I've learned about scams on the radio, because they once said, oh, guess what? Home Depot, their credit card database has been breached. And I thought, oh my goodness, I bought something from them using my credit card. You know, again, that has nothing to do with an investment per se, but you want to protect your money the best way you can. The only way you can do that is to stay informed, read information, pay attention. There's nothing wrong if you're a member of a church group or whatnot, a library group, if you want to get together to discuss these things amongst yourselves so that you're informed. One thing that the AARP has, it's called a fraud watch program, and they have information that's available to people out there. What it is, it's a computer-based program, and people can talk to other people, not directly, but if you have information about an investment scam and you were not cheated, or even if you might have put some money, if you want to mention that, they'll put that information on the computer in the AARP Fraud Watch network, so that if you are a member of that network, you can read what is going on in Pennsylvania or you know, in the United States in terms of scams and stuff like that. Let me get back to the audacity of some of these operators. And let me just tell you about, let's see where I have it. Both FINRA and the Securities Exchange Commission have educational programs, and they try to let people know about what's going on. Wouldn't you know that the swindlers have used fake emails purported to be from the SEC or from the FINRA organization, either guaranteeing investments? They don't do that kind of thing. They are there to regulate. But yet, these swindlers decided, hey, you know, some of these people aren't really that aware of what these organizations or agencies are, what they do. Let's use some of these highfalutin names and say, hey, we can help you, you know, or we can go through and get some information. And I'm going to just indicate what's here. April the 4th of 2018, the SEC Office of Investor Education and Advocacy issued a warning where fraudsters misrepresented that they worked for the SEC and pretended to help investors buy stock or confirm trades. How about that? A new wrinkle, huh? The SEC does not contact investors for that purpose. They do not confirm trades, set up trading accounts, or record details of trades. If you receive an email or a phone call claiming to be the SEC to confirm your purchase or to help you trade a stock, it's a scam. Now, that was April the 4th. Now, two other things. The Securities and Exchange Commission issues alerts and bulletins. They call investor alerts, investor bulletins. The difference is this. The alerts focus on recent investment frauds and scams, the alerts. The bulletins talk about topical issues that relate to recent commission actions against some of these companies. FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and they're a securities regulator. They put out an investor alert about these imposter scams. And let me just say about the imposter scams. As you may be aware, probably 3 or 4 years ago, there was an explosion of imposter scams starting with these IRS. IRS calls. You have failed to pay your taxes. We have a warrant for your arrest. For whatever reason, people hear, I have a warrant for your arrest, they forget how the IRS operates. The IRS does not send people to come out to arrest you. They send you information by US mail saying whether you owe, how much you owe, why, and you have appeal rights, and so on and so on. But people thought, oh my goodness, you know. So there have been an explosion of these imposter scams to the tune where they're pretending to be FINRA as well as from the Securities Exchange Commission. Let me just read you about this. FINRA nor any of its executives will ever provide a guarantee on an investment or offer to facilitate your participation in a money-making scheme. Swindlers decided to use FINRA's name, logo, and actually pose as FINRA's chief executive officer in email correspondence, suggesting that FINRA provides a guarantee related to an investment pitch. which in fact was actually an advanced fee scheme. So there you go, pretending to be FINRA as well as the SEC, and these organizations are actually regulatory organizations trying to work in behalf of the consumer. And yet, swindlers have taken it upon themselves to say, oh yeah, we're going to guarantee this for you. Again, if you're not aware, if you're not in the know, and how did I find out about some of this stuff? I went on the SEC website. I went to sec.gov, finra.org to get information. And that's why I was able to mention some of this stuff to you. So it behooves all of us to stay as informed as possible. We're not going to know everything about everything, but the more you know, the better off you are, maybe the better off your children are and grandchildren. And the other thing is to talk to your children and grandchildren so that they're aware that they can be conned as well. Don't forget, some of these people that gave money to some of these people relied on the fact that they had been in business for 20 or more years, and they said, well, if the guy was really crooked, and yet the guy was really crooked. Any questions? Any questions? Also, I have here all free material. Maybe you yourself may not be able to use it or don't need to use it because you're well off or you know how to preserve your money. But don't forget, if you have kids, grandkids, maybe some of this stuff might be helpful to them. One thing that I saw, and I'll mention where I got it from. This is an AARP. I'm a member of AARP. I got involved in AARP because my wife wanted to get the discounts, to be honest. So because she got the discounts, I became a member. However, I only became a volunteer. We've been members for years, but I only became a volunteer doing this kind of thing since 2009. However, not to talk too much. There's an article in here that I made a copy of for you. It's called The 10 Commandments of Smart Money. And it's the 10 Commandments that says to stay financially secure, carve these guidelines in stone. So take this information for what it's worth. It's written by a guy by the name of Alan Roth, who has been involved in investment advising and whatnot for over 20 years. So it's a very good article. And as I said, it was in this latest issue that just came out. This is the June-July 2018 edition. And because I am a member, we get this as well as the bulletin. And the bulletin is the larger publication that usually has information there about fraud and things of that nature. So, as I said, this stuff is primarily from the Banking and Securities Department. The Fraud Watch Network, I didn't bring a lot of information about that. If you are an AARP member, you can find out a little bit more about that. The good thing about that, it doesn't cost any money. You don't have to be over 55. Your grandchildren can be members of Fraud Watch. And all it is a way for you to try to keep up with what's going on in the marketplace out there, because things are evolving and changing, but they know that there's a lot of money out there and they would like to get their hands on it. Not everybody's a crook, but the ones that are, it's a small group, but they can do a lot of damage. So we want you to save your money, protect your money, and make sure you stay as well informed as you possibly can. Again, any questions?
How do you get to that fraud thing? Is that online?
Yes, you can go to aarp.org
All right.
and learn about the Fraud Watch program.
Fraud Watch.
Fraud Watch program.
Okay.
It's actually, it's called Fraud Watch Network. And there's no dots in between, it's Fraud Watch Network, all one thing. So it's AARP dot Fraud Watch Network, okay? And that'll give you some information. All of these books came courtesy of Pennsylvania Department of Banking, other than this from the AARP magazine, and this, which was provided along with this for me to use, from FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority. And there's information, and it says, Fighting Fraud 101, and it says, the faces of fraud, and it gives you information. Protect yourself in the conversation. Turn the tables and ask questions. And it has a bunch of things in here. One thing I'll just, before you hear people have these initials after their name, you know, so-and-so. Maybe you've seen the commercial on TV by Pennsylvania Department of Banking, where the guy is nicely dressed, and he's talking to a couple of people, and he says, would you invest your money with me? And because he's nicely dressed, they say, sure. And then what's he do? He says, well, I'm just a disc jockey. I'm just a disc jockey. I play music. That's what I do. I don't know anything about investment. But the point was, people have to be aware of what is going on out there, because you may sign up with somebody that isn't who he claims or she claims to be. Now, again, with these letters, don't forget, you can actually buy some of these letters by sending money to somebody on the computer. There is, through FINRA, you can do checks to find out what these initials stand for. Some person had let's see, I have to write it down because I can't, what it was, the first initials of certified high school graduate. Right? Certified, what's that mean? It means nothing, but they had those 4 letters after their name. And you go, wow, 4 letters? That's more than 3. That must be somebody that knows something about something. So again, because somebody has initials after their name, you don't know whether it's true or not. Now, very quickly again, fiduciary. If somebody is a fiduciary, by law, they have to have your best interests at heart. In other words, what's best for you in terms of investment. That's what a fiduciary is. A person doesn't have to be a fiduciary. You need certain things in order to get that qualification or that status. Otherwise, you are basically just a sales rep or a broker. And then there's what they call the suitability. What is suitable to sell, they can sell you. What's suitable. It doesn't mean that it's best for you. They might be able to get a bigger commission on a different product. So they may sell you the different product because that's all they have to be, suitable. They're not a fiduciary, where the fiduciary can't sell you unless he's a fake. That's why it's important to make sure you check, you dot your I's, cross your T's, whatever. You want to make sure the person or persons you're dealing with are who they say they are, that they're legitimate. And I think that pretty much covers a number of things. I went through probably a number of things that I wanted to. I probably skipped half, but you know, we don't have a lot of time, but I figure I gave you as much information that you could at least start with that. I hope it was useful to you, and I thank you.
Thank you.